All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's live cooking demonstration. My name is Ryan Smith. I am the Wellness Program Administrator with Employee Development and Wellness Services, and I am a registered dietitian. Thank you for your patience. I had an interesting morning between a flat tire and some other things happening, but we're here, so we can go ahead and get started with today's recipe. Before we do begin, though, I wanted to point out a couple quick things. We are making use of the WebEx platform today. So throughout today's presentation, if you've got any questions, any comments, ideas, thoughts, we'd love to hear them. It's great to be able to hear other people's ideas for creative swaps and suggestions for how you might change or improve the cooking process. So put those in the chat. We'll be sure to answer any questions and address any comments at the end of today's presentation. Additionally, we're going to be recording this session, so if you would like to share this with a colleague or review it again later, we'll have that uploaded to our EDWS YouTube channel. So with Halloween right around the corner, I thought it was a great time to do a recipe that involved pumpkin. And of course, as the weather starts to cool down a little bit, it's a bit of a dreary, rainy day out there for me. Chili sounds better and better. Something like a hot bowl of chili just to kind of warm you up and fill you up. And we're going to make it really nutritious today as well. So give me just a second here. We're going to make sure everything is good to go. Okay. So today we are going to be working with a couple different vegetables, quite a few ingredients, but overall the recipe is pretty simple because we're essentially throwing everything into a large pot on the stovetop and letting it do most of the work for us. You will need a pretty large pot. We have 4 different types of beans going in, a large can of crushed tomatoes, quite a few onions, and then our winter squash and some broth. So you'll need something that can hold a lot of volume to contain all that. Now, I do want to point out something. The recipe is a 4-bean and pumpkin chili, but we're actually going to be working with a butternut squash today. Believe it or not, a lot of dishes that say they have pumpkin in them don't actually use pumpkin. They'll use another winter squash variant. I like butternut squash just because it's a little easier to peel and work with than a pumpkin. All those, curved edges on the pumpkin and the little divots in it make it pretty difficult. So this is a butternut squash that I've already gone ahead and peeled. So we're using that just to simplify. You really won't be able to taste the difference, and visually it looks a lot like pumpkin as well. So the first thing we'll do is we're going to add a tablespoon of olive oil to our large pot. And I'm just going to actually eyeball this here. A tablespoon of olive oil, and then we're going to put it over medium-high heat, give that oil an opportunity to heat up. Right? So we'll give that an opportunity to heat up. And I have actually pre-chopped all the onion that I'll be using today. So this is 2 medium white onions that I've diced up. They're going to go in. I know this looks like a mountain of onion, but this makes 8 servings of chili. So you get quite a lot of mileage out of it. And the onions cook down significantly, and they add a lot of flavor. So we'll actually set those over to the side, give that oil just a little bit of time to heat up, and let's talk through some of our other ingredients that we'll be using today. So I already talked about the butternut squash a little bit. We are going to be using carrots. You're going to need about 1.5 cups of chopped carrots. That's going to be about 3 medium carrots. You can measure that out if you really want to, or you can just kind of eyeball it if you feel comfortable with that. We are going to be using low sodium vegetable broth. If you want to add a little more flavor to it, you could certainly use chicken broth or another animal protein flavored broth, but try to get the low sodium variant. We want to keep this a heart healthy meal, so we're keeping the sodium low where we can, making sure our blood pressure enjoys the meal as well. So low sodium broth is a good choice here. Similarly, we're working with 4 different types of beans here. I'm using northern beans, I'm using pinto beans, black beans, and kidney beans. And I bought low sodium varieties of all of those as well to just help out with that. So we've heated the oil up a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and dump in our onion. And we'll turn the heat down to a medium heat now. And you'll want a spoon of some sort that you can stir the onion around a little bit. We don't want any of it to burn. So we're going to stir periodically, letting that onion cook down. We're wanting it to brown a little bit. We're going to give it about 4 to 5 minutes over that medium heat, and then we'll add in our carrots. But let's go ahead and start chopping the carrots here. So carrots are great. They are an excellent source of vitamin A. Now, a lot of us probably think of vitamin A and think of our eyesight, which it does help out with. It doesn't actually improve our eyesight. So if you wear glasses or you use contacts, carrots are not going to change that. But it's important to have the vitamins that are in carrots so that we can have better night vision specifically. It'll help out with that. People who have a deficiency can start to have issues. So good to have them in the diet. So we're just chopping these up. We don't want the pieces to be too big because when you bite into it, you want it to be kind of a small piece that you can enjoy. You don't want a huge chunk of carrot. And if you get like a big, thick one like this at the end, it can get a little dangerous to chop into that because it will wiggle a little bit. I like to just turn them on their side. It's got a nice stable base there, and then I'll just cut through it one more time to make it a little smaller. And we'll chop our other carrot now here as well. So one of the goals with this dish is we've got a lot of different vegetable types going in, which is going to help us get a lot of fiber and a lot of different vitamins and minerals in the diet. And that's really the goal of all these recipes, is to work in more fiber, work in more of those vitamins and minerals that so many people are just not getting enough of in their regular diet. So let's give the onions another stir over here. All right, and we'll give those just a couple more minutes before we add the carrots in. What I do want to do, though, is actually move over to our winter squash. I'm using a butternut squash again today in place of pumpkin. You're welcome to use pumpkin at home, but it will take a little extra work to peel it. So I pre-peeled this one, and what that process involved was I cut off the top and the bottom of it, and then using just a vegetable peeler over the trash can, I went ahead and peeled all of it off. So now this is prepared to be cut and chopped up. Now, these are pretty solid vegetables. They are winter squashes, so the summer varieties are a little softer, a little more watery, and they have less carbohydrates in them. The winter varieties, like butternut squash, are higher in carbohydrates and a little bit harder whenever you try to cut through them. So be careful with your knife. You want to use as sharp of a knife as you can. A dull knife may get stuck or wiggle a little bit. The knife I'm using today, I tried to sharpen in preparation for this, but in testing out the recipe, it still has some difficulties, so be very careful whenever you use it. One thing that I will advise doing is a trick I use for a lot of vegetables. If you have an irregular shape where it's round like this and it's trying to roll around whenever you're cutting it, cut a small sliver off the side to get that flat plane, and then you can lay it down and it'll be a little more stable. I'll demonstrate that here in just a moment. But let's go ahead and add our carrots in here to the pot. So that's, again, about 1.5 cups of carrots or about 3 medium carrots. We're going to give this a stir, mix it in with those onions. And we'll cook that for about 4 to 5 minutes as well, stirring occasionally. I'm just checking on the heat here. We don't want to overdo it because we are going to cook the entire chili at the end for an extended period of time. So we don't want to scorch anything early on in the process. So now with this, what I usually do when I'm cutting the butternut squashes, you'll notice there's a round kind of bulb at the bottom and then more of a neck to it that's a little straighter. I will usually cut this in half down the middle here. Now, again, this can rock a little bit. So if you're worried about the rocking, you can come over here and take a small slice off of it. And that makes it a little more stable. So you may have to press down on the top of your knife. Again, be very careful with this. Don't go too fast. I actually need to, give me a second. I had to lock these table legs in place and press down, and then you will come through like that. And you'll have these two halves. So there's this rounder part inside of here. We're going to have seeds and kind of a core to it, if you will. If you've done jack-o'-lanterns before, when you scoop out a pumpkin, there's all the pulp and the seeds. This round part has that inside of it. This neck part, though, doesn't, so we're free to cut through it without having to worry about scooping any of that out. So it's a little easier. Now, we might get some questions in the chat about using canned pumpkin or something like that in place of this. This is the most work in the recipe, is chopping this up, peeling it, getting it ready. Canned pumpkin, you could put in here, but because it's so soft, it's going to really change the texture of the rest of the chili. Having the chunks like this, though, produces a pretty different effect. So I will cut that little slice off to give me a little bit of a flat plane here. So I'm going to try to work with that. And again, pressing the knife in like so. And getting this into more manageable pieces. So now we've got two really nice flat planes, and we can see these are stable. They're not going to rock anywhere. So I'm just going to cut this into little pieces, like strips, like so, and then I'll run the knife back through and cut them into a smaller diced amount. In terms of the size of these pieces, again, you've got a little bit of choice as far as how small you want them to be, but we want them to at least be even in size because they do all need to cook evenly. And if you've got one piece that's really big and then a piece that's really small, they're going to cook at different temperatures, and that's not what we're looking for. We want them to be consistent. So let me check the time. Okay, so we've had that on for a little bit here. We're going to go ahead and add some garlic in now. You can use 3 cloves of fresh garlic, or if you're using minced garlic, you can use 1.5 teaspoons. So I'll go ahead and add that in. Right, and we're going to give that a stir. I'm going to lower the heat just a bit. And then we'll come back to our butternut squash and continue chopping it. So I'm looking for pieces about that size, maybe 1-inch cubes, nothing too big. They are really hard right now, still kind of like a potato would be before you cook it, but they're going to soften a lot over the course of cooking the chili. What we'll actually do is after we add in all these ingredients, we're going to cook it for 30 minutes and just kind of let it simmer. I won't do that all on camera today. I've pre-made it, so I'll show you what it looks like at the end. But it'll give it plenty of time for this winter squash to soften and become a little bit less dense like it is right now. Now, as you're cutting this, if you see some pieces that you think are a little bigger than the others, of course, you can kind of course correct and go back and chop them into smaller pieces like so. So we'll just continue chopping this. Okay. Now, for this part, I mentioned there is kind of a pulp and some seeds in it. And it actually will sound like a drum. If I press through here, it'll actually puncture it. And you can see that inside that's a lot like a pumpkin. So using that flat plane that you made earlier, press it down and let's go ahead and cut through this. And you see that knife goes through a little faster because there's less resistance in the middle there. And this is a lot like a pumpkin. You can scoop it out with your hands. If you want to take a spoon and kind of dig out that pulp and all those seeds, you can. And I'm just going to put them into this bowl here. Now, these seeds in here, you can actually do a lot with, much like pumpkin seeds. You can roast them and season them if you wanted to put some like cinnamon sugar on them or any other sort of seasoning or spices that you might enjoy. The squash family, a lot of them are pretty similar in terms of applications. So that's really up to you how you want to handle that. At a certain point, you might just want to reach in there and pull out some of those stringy, pulpy bits. All right. So let's go ahead and chop this piece up now. So we've gotten those seeds out so we can chop it just like the other side. Once again, a sharp knife is really helpful for this. You can see there's a lot of resistance as I'm cutting through this vegetable. It is just a very dense vegetable. And as you're chopping it, if you've got any of the pulpy bits left, you can use a small knife to take them off. You can peel them off. Or if they end up making it into your chili, not going to hurt you or anything like that. It'll cook down once everything's added and heated up. So you are looking for about 2 to 3 cups of the butternut squash. If you get a medium butternut squash, you should have plenty to put in. In fact, I'm actually not going to make use of this other part of the bottom of it. I don't need that much squash because I don't want to overfill the pot. So what we're going to do now is go ahead and just add this in to the rest of the chili. Actually, I'm sorry, I take that back. Before we add in all of that, we're going to add in our low sodium vegetable broth. So this is a container that has 4 cups of vegetable broth in it. We are making use of all 4 cups. So go ahead and pour that in. Okay. And now we're adding that liquid base for the chili. I did have a few pieces of butternut squash that I threw in there a little early on accident, but that's okay. They'll make it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to adjust the heat up a little bit, and we want to bring this to a boil. Once we get it to a boil, we're going to add in our crushed tomatoes. We're going to add in the 4 different types of beans we have, and we're going to add in that butternut squash, in addition to some different seasonings. So today, to add flavor to this, we're going to be using 3 tablespoons of chili powder, which will give it a little bit of spice. We'll use 2 to 3 teaspoons of cumin. So that's going to give it kind of a savory flavor that I think will be really nice. And then 3/4 teaspoons of salt. So not doing a whole lot. Even though this is low sodium broth, it still does have a lot of salt in it. So we're going to keep the salt that we add from other sources to a minimum. And then the last thing we'll do, and this is optional, but I do recommend it, we're going to do a little bit of cinnamon, about 1 teaspoon worth, or if you just want to kind of sprinkle it and eyeball it. The cinnamon adds a little bit of sweetness, and it kind of makes the flavor a bit more complex, a little more varied, and I think it pairs really nicely with everything else going into this. But again, that is an optional ingredient. You can choose to keep that or avoid it if you wish. So all we're doing now is this is starting to boil over here, and it should boil pretty quickly because we had it at a decently high temperature. And then we will add in the rest of our ingredients. Now, again, I want to emphasize that a large pot is very important. I've filled up about half of this already, and I still have this. This is a 28-ounce can of crushed tomatoes, no salt added, and that's going to add a lot of liquid. The beans, 4 cans of them, are going to add a lot of volume, and then our 2 to 3 cups of butternut squash will add additional volume. So you can see how this all starts to stack up. Again, it makes 8 servings, so it's all going somewhere, but you do need a large pot to hold all of that. So this looks like it is coming to a boil here. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and add in the no salt added tomatoes. Okay. And once you do that, the bubbles will stop because you've added more liquid. There's not enough heat to make it boil again, but we're going to bring it to a boil one more time here in just a moment. So I'm adding in the red kidney beans. We're now doing the pinto beans, and these are rinsed and drained. We're not adding in the liquid from the beans. That will make that pot overflow even more. We're doing the Great Northern beans or the white beans. And then now we're adding in the black beans. And I'm trying to see, yeah, you can tell from that camera. It's stacked pretty high, and we still have the butternut squash to add in. So be careful as you're adding this in. You don't want to splash too much. So we'll get those pieces in there. Okay. Let's toss in our seasonings real quick. We're going to stir this all together in just a moment. So 3/4 teaspoon of salt, 3 tablespoons of chili powder, and 2 teaspoons of cumin. And then I'm going to do just a little bit of cinnamon, about a teaspoon, to give it a little bit of sweetness to it. Now, you can use your spoon and stir that around a little bit. Be cautious if you're filling up your pot, you may not have a lot of room to stir, so you can stir very slowly and carefully. What we're really trying to do is just get the ingredients dispersed. We want that seasoning to make contact with the liquid so that it can get cooked in and give all those different vegetables all sorts of different flavors. You will notice the butternut squash has a tendency to stay near the top just because of the density of all the different ingredients. That's okay. Once things start cooking, it will soften a lot and it'll all get cooked in there nicely. So now let's go ahead and cover this, and we're going to bring it to a boil. So we had it boiling just a moment ago. We're going to bring it back to that. And once you get it to a boil, you will take the lid off and we will simmer it for 30 minutes without the lid on it. After about 30 minutes, you can use a fork or a spoon to get a piece of the butternut squash out, and you can see if it's tender. If it's tender, if you stab it with the fork, it should give, the fork should go in, and that means that you are ready to enjoy it. So we're looking for about 30 minutes or for that to become tender. Now, we're not going to sit here and wait for 30 minutes for that to simmer. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and pre-prepared it, and we can talk a little bit about the nutrition and some other things you might add to it to make it even tastier. So this is a bowl from a batch I made earlier. You can kind of take a look at what that looks like, but we're going to actually trick it up a little bit and make it look a little nicer and a little tastier. You may have seen the photo at the beginning of the presentation for what it looks like if we kind of dress it and give it some toppings. So what I'm going to use will actually be two things, and the recipe suggests a couple different ideas. One of the things they mentioned would be some chopped jalapenos on top of it, which I really like spicy food. I think that would be nice to have on here in addition to that chili powder that's in there. Chili powder is a little spicy, but really not that much, but some jalapenos on top of it would be great. But what we're going to do is we're going to actually make use of pepitas, or these are basically pumpkin seeds. Pumpkin seeds have that white outer casing. If you open them up, inside are these little green guys. I don't know if you can see what that looks like. These are in a lot of trail mixes. You may find them on top of dishes. They're pretty popular right now, and they make a nice crunchy addition and add a little bit of healthy fats and extra protein to this. So what I'm going to do is just sprinkle some of these on top. I think the green color also helps to make this pop a little bit. And then the last thing I'm going to do is add a little bit of cheese. Now, if you are a vegan, you could stop right here. All the ingredients in this are vegan friendly so far, but I am going to add a little bit of Parmesan cheese. It's going to add a little more fat to it, a little more protein, just make it a little heartier. And I'm not doing a whole lot. Just a sprinkle there, maybe a tablespoon or two. And I think that that pop of green, the Parmesan cheese there, really helps bring the dish together. It adds a little more calories to it, but it still keeps it in a very reasonable range. I am going to send out the nutrition information with a copy of the recipe after today's presentation, so you'll be able to see how this might fit into your lifestyle. It does have a good source of protein coming from all the different types of beans we use, so very strong plant-based protein there. If you add the pepitas or the cheese, that's a little bit more protein that you're getting in there. In terms of carbohydrates, the beans have some carbohydrates, and of course the winter squash has carbohydrates as well, but this is still a diabetic-friendly recipe. We are choosing very healthy carbohydrates that are rich in vitamins and minerals and high in fiber as well, meaning that this is going to be a good choice if you're trying to keep your blood sugar in a healthy range. It'll be that sustained energy, no spikes or anything like that. Now, for the leftovers, so this is coming to a boil, so I'm actually going to reduce the heat now down to a simmer, and then take that lid off, and we're going to let it cook for 30 minutes, like I said, and then that'll be good to go. For leftovers, what I would recommend doing is if you want to keep it in the fridge, again, it's about 8 servings. It's good in there for 3 to 4 days if you could put it into meal prep containers. However, if you don't expect to go through all of it in that amount of time, this does freeze very well. You can use small portion containers, freeze individual portions, and then you can reheat them either on the stovetop or in the microwave whenever you want to have that dish again. So that's one of my favorite things about chili is you can get a long duration out of it by freezing it and then reheating it, and it holds up really well in terms of the texture and the flavors of everything. So that wraps up today's recipe. Again, I appreciate everyone's patience with us getting started a little late today. A bit of a crazy morning, but we got through it. And even when our days can be a little hectic, it's always important to take time to plan out our meals or have a healthy snack. Things like that really add up, even on the days where it's a little more trying than the other days. So appreciate everyone. I'm going to take a look over here at the chat and see if there are any questions I can answer. Okay, I see some comments about definitely a good recipe for the upcoming colder weather we're going to have. I do hope to do some additional chili recipes in December as well. We've got quite a few different ones that we've made before that are really nice and hearty and very warm. And I see a question underneath it asking about some substitutions for just other vegetables and ideas like that. So we've got carrots in here. I know not everyone is a big fan of cooked carrots. I actually saw some recipe modifications for this one where people were suggesting adding things like broccoli to it. I really like broccoli. I think that would be a good vegetable to add in here. If you want to do anything like broccoli, keep in mind the texture that the vegetable has. So If you're cooking something that is softer and has a lot of water content, think like a bell pepper, you probably want to add that in the later stage because you don't want to overcook it and turn it to mush. So the stage where we add the beans and the tomatoes at the end, if it's a softer vegetable, that's a good time to put it in. If it is something a little harder or a little heartier, you may want to put it in a bit earlier. But as you can see, we added the butternut squash in the last step, even though it's a very hard vegetable, but because it has 30 minutes to simmer and cook, it ends up being nice and tender and soft by the end of the recipe. So really, that final step where you add in the beans and the tomatoes, you can sneak in a lot of different vegetables there. Whether you want to do broccoli or cauliflower florets, if you want to take in the carrot, anything like that, you can definitely mix that up. Okay, and I see another question here. So just to reiterate, we are going to send out a copy of the recipe, the recording, and the nutrition information. So you'll be able to see all that and decide how it might fit into your meal plan. But I don't see any other questions here. Let me double check the Q&A. All right, I think we are all set. So again, everyone, I appreciate you viewing the recipe demonstration with me today. We are going to be doing some other sessions this week. Tomorrow we'll have a guided meditation and yoga at 12 p.m. If you're interested in attending that, we are offering it online virtually, and it'll be in person at the Clarkston campus in the CL building 4190. If you don't already receive our emails, we send out reminders for all of our upcoming events. You can email us at edws@gsu.edu, and we can get you on that subscriber list. But with that being said, thank you everyone so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.